Water brushes, what are they? And also how do they work? So let's play with these today for my first time using them whilst I'm working on two simple watercolour landscape paintings. So let's get that water brush wet and let's make a start. Now within the kit I've got here, which is one by Grabby Products, the watercolour brush they provide is, well, I know it's plastic. And you think, well, is that going to be substantial? Is it going to really work? Something like that. And because I've never used one before, I'm actually quite sceptical about it as well. So I'm so used to fine detail brushes all the time. But even so, I've got to give it the benefit of the doubt. I'm going to give this one a try. Now, I've found when I'm unscrewing this one, first of all, I couldn't unscrew it. Well, why can't I unscrew it? Well, that's because the threads in these are the opposite way. Normally with a thread, you'd wind it clockwise, wouldn't you? I've got my water pot here. The first thing I tried, because as I said, I've never studied this, I've never tried using one before, was to use it like a water dropper or pipette, something like that. And that's by squeezing the tube first of all, right in the very centre, and then sucking the water up through the tube from my water container. But I found that it didn't work that well. I had to resort in grabbing my pipette and then simply filling it up with that. And that works really well. So I suggest if you've never used one of these before, I think I'm going to fill that little reservoir up in the handle. Use a pipette or a syringe or something like that within there, and that will work really well to be able to fill it back up again. So remember, to tighten it, you've got to go to the left. You've got to go anti-clockwise, okay? Or if you're in other countries, counterclockwise. Now the bristles are quite firm, and these are synthetic bristles, so not stable or anything like that. And to be honest with you, I prefer to use synthetic bristles a lot of the time for my paintings, which I do. So now I've got to think about, I'm going to load this brush. How does it work? So first thing I've done, I've made up some colours straight away, and that's some orange and some browns and all sorts of colours, which I'm going to use for a basic background for this landscape painting. However, when I wanted to apply clear water onto the paper, as you can see, there's a little bit of colour left in that water. And that's because when I clean this brush out, by giving it a good old shake in the water, I squeeze the handle, and in turn it sucks up some dirty water through the bristles into the reservoir inside the handle. So my water inside the handle is now, well, dirty. It's coloured. Not dirty, it's just paint, isn't it, at the end of the day. But now I've got coloured water, but I'm not too worried about that because it still works quite well. And because I'm applying quite a lot of colour to the paper anyway, I've got away with that. However, when you want to wash something like this out, you've got to make sure it's thoroughly washed out first. So if you try squeezing the handle of this brush to push the water through the handle and then through the bristles on the brush, then that's a good way of getting the colour out of the bristles. But as soon as you let go of that handle, you'll suck that colour back up again into the reservoir inside the handle. So it's trying to get that just about right, you know? So wash it out thoroughly the way you would normally wash a normal brush. Don't try to flood the water out of the handle through the brush to make it work. If you like this video, don't forget to click on like and subscribe, because at least that way around, when I produce another video here for YouTube for you to watch, you shouldn't miss it. Now I know that there's many ways of using these water brushes, and this is just the way I've found so far. And as I mentioned, this is the first time ever in 40 plus years of painting with watercolours that I've actually used one of these water pens. So let's try and pick up some more colour, but first thing I need to do is refill the reservoir inside the handle again. Now I know that as you tilt this brush forward, the water inside the handle will start to soak through those bristles. And as it does so, you find it will weaken the paints that you've already picked up within those bristles. So when you've mixed up your colours to say, I don't know, a milky or even a creamy consistency, when you apply that paint to the paper, that paint can be very easily a little bit thinner because you've already got water already seeping through those bristles from the reservoir inside the handle. I know that's one of the benefits for using something like this. And to be honest with you, if you wanted to work with, let's say, a gradated wash, rather than something like this variegated wash I'm putting on at the moment, you can gradually squeeze some water through the bristles as you're applying the colour to the paper. So therefore you apply the colour as thick as you can first of all, but as you work your way down that page to get a variegated wash, just gently squeeze the handle and that will push a little bit more water through them bristles and then in turn weaken the colour on the paper as you work your way down. They can keep doing that all the way down to get to the bottom of the paper. However, as soon as you let go of that handle after squeezing it in, yeah, you know what's going to happen again. It will squeeze the paint back inside the handle from them bristles. So that's one of the things I've found with these. I do like them, don't get me wrong. I do like this particular brush. And I know there's a variety of different brushes on the market as well. And they all tend to vary in the size of the handle, as well as the bristles, how long the bristles are, how wide the bristles are. Is it a size 00? Nah, of course not. Not my favourite size brush. Has it got a good tip on it? Some have, some not so much. And some are also chiselled in shape as well, I've noticed. Yeah, completely different shapes on the tips. So it really depends on what you're after with something like this. But when you're working with wet and wet like I'm doing here, you can slowly start to apply a little bit of colour by working the wet area. And that works really well because sometimes with some brushes I find that when you're working wet in wet, they tend to leave streaks and marks on the paper. This one, even though it's a fairly stiff bristle brush, synthetic as I mentioned, is for me quite large. It works really well, to be honest with you. I'm very surprised with something that in your hand feels, well, quite cheap, quite inexpensive. It really does. So let's have a go at doing some detail work with some dark colour. So this is a really rich black I've made up. And I made it with usual colours of red, green and blue. And it's also quite thick, so very creamy within my mixing well. Now I know, as I've already mentioned, that as soon as I start applying this colour, I know that water is going to seep through that handle again, through to the bristles, and then weaken that colour down as I apply it to the paper. So I've got to bear that in mind, and that's not something that I'm used to experiencing when I'm working with watercolour brushes. Or in this case, a water reservoir brush. I know, very different. So let's try some detail work out. Now, how fine a line can we get with these brushes? Now, as I'm working on this painting, you can see I'm actually getting some fairly fine lines with this. That's making sure that the bristles are not too overloaded to begin with. I certainly don't want to overload those bristles when I'm doing finer details, but even though the water is still coming through them bristles a little bit, it's working quite well. I'm quite surprised, to be honest with you. And the bristles feel smooth enough to kind of work up some of the colour and fade that colour out onto the paper as well. And I know that I can apply a little bit more water to the paper by gently squeezing the handle of this brush. But again, you've got to remember, as soon as you let go, it's going to suck that colour back into the handle again. Yeah, which you don't want to happen. But working on the dry paper, I can actually get some very fine details. And also get some grazing effects. In other words, dry brush effects on the paper. But to be honest with you, I am very surprised about that as well. Because how do you get a dry brush effect with a brush that's always leaking water through the bristles? But in this case, this particular one did work. Now, the way the brush is working so far, I'm actually quite pleased with it, to be honest with you. I was so very surprised, really surprised. Because I can apply very fine lines with the tip of this brush, but also just press on a little bit harder, I can get the lines a little bit thicker as well. I have noticed that sometimes the paint will break up, and when I'm picking up the paint from my mixing well, it doesn't always soak into the bristles that well. Not compared to my other brush, my normal watercolour brushes is what I would say. But even though my usual watercolour brushes are very often synthetic, and also not normally expensive brushes, which I tend not to buy, to be honest with you, because I find the cheaper to mid-range brushes tend to work really well. This, compared to what I normally use, yeah, I'm actually very impressed, I really am. For something which is, well, plastic at the end of the day. When I'm mixing colours with this, I find that it's not too bad for mixing colours because the simple fact is the bristles are fairly stiff. And because of the stiffness of the bristles, you find you can really mix that colour around in those mixing wells quite well. As for holding the brush, I do find it very chunky, because it is chunky, isn't it? Because it's basically a water reservoir within a brush handle. But it's very, very chunky, and I'm used to having a very fine, thin brush in my hand. So this feels a bit awkward. It feels more like a biro, you know, more like a pen, something like that in your hand when you're actually holding it. But very lightweight as well, because there's hardly any weight to this water brush. But whilst I'm working on this horse, it doesn't feel like you're actually holding anything, to be honest with you. And because of that, I like a little bit of weight in my hand because you've got a bit of a balance to that brush then, haven't you? Even when it's full of water, it still feels very lightweight. So to me, would I use it again? Yeah, I think I would, you know. But very carefully, to be honest with you. I'll still aim towards my usual brushes, which I use for my wildlife watercolour paintings. Because I do like my detail work, and I do find these water brushes, or this particular one anyway, is very difficult to control sometimes because of the size of the brush in your hand, because of the size of that handle. So have you used one of these water brushes before? Let me know in the comments down below. I'd love to hear from you and find out what your thoughts are on these water brushes. And if you are interested in knowing the brushes that I tend to use so I find detailed paintings, have a look at the link to the top right hand corner of the screen. I'll see you there.